Hello and welcome to today's episode of pianoTV. So today I wanted to take a look at the Disney movie Fantasia, which was released in 1940, and it has some great classical music in it. So I thought this would be a good movie to discuss some specific classical music compositions. In this video, we're going to be looking at 7, because there's 7 main classical compositions in Fantasia. We'll talk about them a little bit, we'll listen to small clips, and I also want to talk a little bit about the history of the movie Fantasia as well. So let's get started. Fantasia debuted in 1940 and was the third ever film released by Disney. The entire score was conducted by Leopold Stokowski and performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra. When Fantasia was released, it garnered significant critical acclaim. So some things that film critics had to say about it were that Fantasia was caviar to the general, ambrosia and nectar for the intelligentsia, and courageous beyond belief. And that was Edwin Schallert of the LA Times. And he also noted the rapturous applause during the interludes. Fantasia was a dream of a symphony concert, an enormously varied concert of pictorial ideas, of abstract music by acknowledged composers, of performers Leopold Stokowski and orchestra players of Hollywood and Philadelphia, and for the vast majority, new and wonderful sound effects, said Isabel Morse Jones of the LA Times. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times said that the motion picture history was made last night. Fantasia dumps conventional formulas overboard and reveals the scope of films for imaginative excursion. Fantasia is simply terrific. The order of the pieces had been shuffled and the most difficult of them eliminated. He criticized the orchestra's performance, observing that the simplification of the score did not save the musical performance, which was execrable. Though Fantasia has been altered and re-released over the years to improve upon its sound and remove racial prejudices, the playlist has remained constant. So these are the compositions we're going to be looking at today. We got the famous Toccata and Fugue in D minor by Bach, some selections from the Nutcracker Suite by Tchaikovsky, the Sorcerer's Apprentice by Dukas, Rite of Spring, Stravinsky, Pastoral Symphony by Beethoven, Dance of the Hours by Ponchielli, and finally, Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky. Now, the one note I want to make before we get into this is that there is one recording we won't be sharing on the screen, and it is Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. Just the reason for this is that the composition isn't in the public domain since it's the most recent of the 7. However, I will leave a YouTube video for you guys over on the blog if you want to check it out. So first up is the Toccata and Fugue by Bach. So while this music is playing, what is going on in Fantasia are live action shots of the orchestra illuminated in blue and gold, backed by superimposed shadows, and they fade into abstract patterns. There are animated lines, shapes, and cloud formations which reflect the sound and rhythms of the music. You've almost definitely heard this piece by Bach in pop culture, and this is one of the pieces that we featured in our video Bach in the Movies, because it is so common and popular in the movies, especially around Halloween time, which you will hear in a moment why when we listen to the clip. There's no consensus on when exactly Bach composed this piece, but it would have been in the early 1700s. And before 1940, when Fantasia was released, this was a virtually unknown organ composition, which is crazy because now it's wildly famous. So let's take a listen. Next, we'll talk about the Nutcracker Suite. So what's happening in the movie at this time is that selections from the Nutcracker Suite underscore scenes depicting the changing of the seasons from summer to autumn to winter. There are a variety of dances presented with fairies, fish, flowers, mushrooms, and leaves. And some of the selections from this ballet you'll hear are Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, Chinese Dance, Dance of the Flutes, Arabian Dance, Russian Dance, and Waltz of the Flowers. Tchaikovsky wrote the music for the Nutcracker Ballet in 1892. Now, the ballet itself didn't really go over that well initially, but the 20-minute suite of music that Tchaikovsky wrote for it was very well received. Because the music was so popular and partly because of Fantasia, bringing fresh ears to this music. The ballet itself is now super popular as well, especially around Christmas time. As far as Tchaikovsky's compositions go, the music from the Nutcracker is probably like among his most well-known compositions. So you have pieces like Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy, which we talked about in the video, The Music of Tchaikovsky. Check that out if you want to listen to more Tchaikovsky. And another one that I'm going to share with you here is Russian Dance, which again, you've probably heard at some point in your lives. Next, we'll look at The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Paul Dukas, which is what's going on in the movie is that Mouse, who is the young apprentice of the sorcerer, Yen Sid, attempts some of his master's magic tricks, but doesn't yet know how to control them. Paul Dukas composed The Sorcerer's Apprentice in 1897. And since this is a symphonic poem, it basically means that he wrote the instrumental music after an already existing poem by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. This was actually a really common thing to do in the Romantic era. Take a poem and write an instrumental composition that tried to represent the words, but musically. Other composers who did things like this were Liszt and Schubert and many others. And like many of the other pieces we're talking about today on this list, this one became quite a bit more famous after the movie Fantasia. So let's take a listen. And that brings us to the Rite of Spring by Stravinsky. So what's going on in Fantasia at this point is a visual history of the Earth's beginnings depicted through various selections from this ballet. The sequence progresses from the planet's formation to the first living creatures, followed by the reign and extinction of the dinosaurs. The Rite of Spring is a ballet with the music composed by Igor Stravinsky in 1913. It's his third opera after Firebird and Petrushka. This ballet was so wild and modern at the time that it actually almost caused a riot in the audience. And part of that was like the choreography and the dancing, but part of that was Stravinsky's really modern and really intense music. There's a lot of dissonance and shifting tonalities that give you like a really uneasy sound when you're listening to it. And unfortunately, this is the one composition out of all 7 that we're talking about today that I cannot share with you because his music is not yet in the public domain because he hasn't been deceased for long enough yet. But I do urge you to check out a video recording of it because this is, again, one of the most famous operas of all time. It's one of the most recorded classical works of all time. And I'll leave a link over on the blog if you want to go check that out. During Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony in the movie, a mythical Greco-Roman world of colorful centaurs and centaurettes, cupids, fauns, and other figures from classical mythology are portrayed in Beethoven's music. There's a gathering for a festival to honor the god of wine. It's interrupted by Zeus, and Zeus creates a storm and directs Vulcan to forge lightning bolts for him to throw at the attendees. Beethoven's 6th Symphony, also nicknamed the Pastoral Symphony, was composed in 1808. And this was one of his only attempts at writing program music. And we kind of talked about that with when we were discussing symphonic poems. Program music is basically trying to take a specific scene and make music that depicts that scene as specifically as possible. This was a style of writing that would end up becoming much more popular after Beethoven's death. So he was kind of in like the early phases of developments in this genre. And this particular symphony was inspired by his many nature walks outside of the city of Vienna. Let's take a quick listen to just a little bit of the first movement. Dance of the Hours by Ponchielli is playing over a scene of a comic ballet in 4 sections. You got Madame Apanova and her ostriches, which represent mourning. You have I'm not going to be able to pronounce this very well, but you have the hippo and her servants, which is in the afternoon. You have the elephant and her bubble-blowing elephant troupe for the evening, and then Ben Alligator and his troupe of alligators for the nighttime. The finale finds all of the characters dancing together until their palace collapses. Dance of the Hours is the Act 3 finale from the opera La Gioconda by the composer Ponchielli, and it debuted in 1876. Now, this part of the opera was specifically a ballet, and this ballet has been famous ever since it was released. Of course, Fantasia went and made it more famous. In this ballet, the music and dancing represents various time periods throughout the day. So you have dawn, day, twilight, and night, and it's all about the struggle of light and dark. And the animations in Fantasia do represent this, albeit in a very unusual way. So let's take a listen. And finally, we have Mussorgsky's Night on Bald Mountain. So what's going on in Fantasia is the devil awakes and summons evil spirits and restless souls from their graves to Bald Mountain. The spirits dance and fly through the air until they're driven back by the sounds of an Angelus bell as night fades into dawn. A chorus is heard singing Ave Maria by Schubert, as a line of robed monks is depicted walking with lighted torches through a forest and into the ruins of a cathedral. Very epic. I just want to make a note too that Ave Maria by Schubert is played in this part, but we're not going to talk about it in the video. We've discussed Ave Maria in depth in other videos before. If you want to check that out, I'll make sure there's a link over on the blog for that. Modest Mussorgsky composed a series of tunes under the big title Night on Bald Mountain in 1867. And it's all about the witches' Sabbath on St. John's Eve. Mussorgsky himself really enjoyed these compositions, but no one else seemed to at the time, and this was never actually published in his lifetime because of it. But it was published after his death, but it wasn't published in his original version. It was heavily edited and altered by a composer named Rimsky-Korsakov, who made it into the composition that we know and love today. We don't really listen to Modest Mussorgsky's version, we listen to Rimsky-Korsakov's version. Rimsky-Korsakov's version debuted in 1886 as a symphonic performance, and that's what we're going to take a listen to today. I hope you enjoyed today's video on the music from Fantasia. I definitely haven't seen Fantasia in many years, and doing this research and listening to these compositions really got me in the zone to watch that movie again. As bizarre as it is, I'm sure it would be interesting to rewatch as an adult as opposed to as a child. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already, and you can come visit us on social, on Facebook, Twitter. I have an Instagram account. This will all be linked on the video screen, and you can also come check us out on Patreon if you would like to show your support that way. Catch you in the next video. And it's actually one of the most recorded ballets. Ugh, why am I so scared?